Hey everyone, it's Kristi, and I'm really excited tonight to be doing this live on-air hangout that is part of no series whatsoever. I'm doing it just because I have a wonderful opportunity to talk to a great person about a fascinating television series. So welcome Steve Shives to talking about Jessica Jones.
Thank you very much. It's always a pleasure to do these things with you. I'm glad we're doing another one.
I know, and I enjoy so much that we can be like geeky on so many different levels. You know, we can talk about new atheism, and we can talk about the sociology of 12 Angry Men, and now we're going to sort of,
Absolutely.
yes, bring well, a lot of perspectives, including a feminist one, to Jessica Jones. So
Yeah.
before we start, just spoiler alert, everybody, we're going to talk about the entire series, start to finish. So if you haven't finished it and you don't want to know things, this is your warning. Go away now, and we'll see you later. Okay, bye. Come back, you'll enjoy it. All right, everyone who's watched it. Hey, now we're ready to
Yay.
go. So, Steve, I'm dying. We've sort of held off in our on-air hangout from talking about this in any meaningful way because we wanted to save it all for the audience. So,
Mhm.
Steve, first, you want to tell me a little bit about, yeah, your experience with Marvel and other Marvel characters, and also the Netflix series and leading up to Jessica Jones. So, just put us like, yeah, give us your Marvel perspective.
Sure. Well, I've been a huge fan of this current set of Marvel movies since they started. Like I saw the first Iron Man movie. I didn't see it in the theater, but I caught up on it, on video after its initial theatrical run and thought it was just fantastic and it turns out that it was a great starting point for this cinematic universe that Marvel Studios has created. And I really have not seen one of those projects yet that I have not enjoyed. I've enjoyed some of them more than others, but I don't, to me, they haven't taken like a major wrong step creatively yet, or even commercially, because they've all been incredibly successful. So, I mean, in terms of the movies themselves, I've seen all the Iron Mans, I've seen the Captain Americas, I've seen both the Avengers movies and thought they were just really enjoyable, really fantastic, like superhero team ups that I used to read in comic books, made real on the screen in just the most fantastic way. And now these Netflix shows with Daredevil and now also Jessica Jones, we get to see sort of Marvel allowing us to peek into a different corner of their universe. Like that's the most enjoyable thing about it to me, is that Marvel has sort of realized that they can do the same thing with movie and TV that they've been doing with their comic books for years, where they can have sort of the big high concept crowd pleasing Avengers movies that everybody's going to go see and they're going to be big blockbusters, but then they can also do something like Daredevil or Jessica Jones, which is more mature, which is a little more serious, and tell stories that are still in the same world as the Avengers, but deal with much different themes and have a very different tone. And that was one of the things that I enjoyed the most about the first series of Daredevil on Netflix, was that, wow, this really feels grown up. This really feels like an adult thing. And I just couldn't believe how good it was. I thought it was one of the best superhero things I'd ever seen. And now I would say the same thing about Jessica Jones. I thought it was just a fantastic series. In many ways, I think it was even better than Daredevil. So yeah, I'm definitely on board. I mean, growing up and even still in my heart, I'm more of a DC Comics guy, but that becomes kind of painful because they have really, in my estimation, taken a lot of very wrong steps. But Marvel has just been knocking it out of the park. So I'm a huge Marvel Cinematic Universe fan, and I think Jessica Jones is like a very good example of what they do right.
Yeah, I have a lot of similar opinions on that. For me, I also, I think I saw Thor in the theaters because I had a friend who was geeking out over it.
Yeah.
And I enjoyed it, but I wasn't sort of taken with it. But then it was, for me, also Iron Man really kind of made me re-examine the whole sort of like really get into it and then go back and find the movies that had happened. I mean, I never really did the Hulk, the old Hulk. So we're starting with sort of the relaunch of this Marvel cinematic kind of
Yeah.
characters. But yeah, and then basically all the films that came out, I always really enjoyed. And then with the TV series, Marvel Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D., I missed
Yeah.
Agent, oh, I can't remember her name because I missed it because I didn't realize it was a thing.
Oh, Agent
Agent
Carter.
Carter.
Yeah. Oh, that was
Yeah.
really good. I really enjoyed
Yes.
that series too.
So I've got like on my to-do list when I have free time, and I will go back because I think they're coming out with another one of that, but maybe it might be
Yeah.
wrong. And I mean, I know a lot of people didn't like Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. I stuck it out, and I really like, you know, I think the characters, it went really good places, and I've been enjoying it as well. And then like you, when I got to the Netflix stuff, you know, I look at the movies as the sort of, you know, 2 hours, 2.5 hours, summer or winter blockbusters that tell one big story. And then the television series are telling an extended story that obviously occasionally intersects with the films. But with the Netflix series, I think the difference, I know I'm probably not using these in the right way in terms of the characters and how they were worked, but from my mind is the Iron Man, the movie series and the TV series and Netflix is the difference between the comic books and a graphic novel.
Mm-hmm.
Because the Netflix series feel like more of a novel, and even the coloring and the way that they're presented with the lack of color and the, you know, dark being a theme, whereas the other movies are really about lightness, especially the television ones. You know, you get a lot of brightness and color as opposed to, say, a Jessica Jones where everything is really washed out. And so, yeah, you're right. It feels more grown up. The themes are more grown up. You can have the longer extended narrative that a television series provides, but you can also have swearing and sex that the movie industry thinks would kill its profits.
Right.
So it basically is for grown-ups, like you said. It's for grown-ups, and it's nice to see something like that told from a superhero you know, genre, because I think in some ways you kind of forget a little bit that it is a superhero movie. You get so caught up in the characters.
Yeah, well, Jessica Jones, that's definitely true, because even though, I mean, it definitely is a superhero story. I mean, there are people in it that have fantastic powers and abilities, far beyond those of mortal men. I have to say that. My Superman, there's Superman in my blood. I have to say that. But yeah, it's a superhero story. But yeah, I mean, no, you don't see superhero costumes. You don't see the special effects are not that in your face, you know.
Mm-hmm.
And it's about as close to the ground and realistic and believable in terms of the world it creates as a superhero story could be. And the point about, you know, the difference between like a comic book and a graphic novel, I think is really spot on, because that innovation in the 70s when comic book publishers realized, hey, we can do like separate series that don't have to go on forever. If somebody has like a Superman story or a Batman story or a Daredevil or a Spider-Man or whatever that doesn't really fit with what we're doing in our regular monthly series, well, we could just make it its own little thing. And it'll still take place in the same larger context as all the other stories, but it'll have a beginning and a middle and an end, and we can have a single story with closure, you know. And that was the start of what are called in comic books miniseries or limited series. And Daredevil and Jessica Jones, I think, are finally the studios that make TV and movie versions of these characters realizing that they can do the same thing. You can take a character like Jessica Jones or like Agent Carter as well, because that was sort of a limited series. It didn't have a full 20-something episode season. Or you can say, okay, this is still the Marvel universe. This still takes place in this much larger, ongoing, ever-expanding context. But this particular story is going to have a beginning and a middle and an end. And when we get to the last episode of Jessica Jones, even though clearly there's going to be more, the story that we have seen is over. So you have that wonderful sense of you get to have the ongoing universe, but you also have a story that is over, that you can have closure with and say this is complete. It's really a wonderful way to present these kind of stories.
Yeah, I agree. And so, yeah, moving on from there, let's talk a little bit maybe about the way that the two Netflix series, because I think Jessica Jones and Daredevil, they're very different stories, but of course they're in a lot of ways they have similar characteristics. So I guess maybe we should focus on Jessica Jones, but don't hesitate to bring in Daredevil into it.
Yeah.
So I want to talk a little bit just like about the mood, and your background obviously is much more vast than mine when it comes to this sort of film theory and cinematic approaches, but there are just ways that they created the story with the setting and the color and the lights and the angles that I thought really helped to create that world you were talking about. And I want to know your thoughts a little bit on that.
Yeah, one of the things that I think a lot of people have said about both Netflix series, but especially about Jessica Jones, is that it has a very film noir feel, which is appropriate because Jessica is a private detective. And that becomes a little less important the further we get into the series. But at the very beginning of the show, that's what she does. She's a private detective. She's an investigator. You know, she follows people and takes pictures. Like, she does all of the sort of classic pulp magazine PI stuff.
Mhm.
And the movie or the series is shot in a way to sort of evoke that. You know, there's lots of these shots of her walking on the streets of New York at night, lit by street lamps. You know, they really sort of classic romantic film noir type of cinematography. That again is a look that you don't really get from any other Marvel project. You know, it sort of sets it apart and says, sort of cues us as the audience, well, this is its own thing. This is something unique within this larger context. And the fact that it's sort of a combination of genres, because it is a superhero story, but it's also a detective story and a film noir story, just as Daredevil was a superhero story, but also a crime story, and leaned very heavily on that crime story element. I would say the same thing about Jessica Jones, is that it takes a superhero story, but it presents it through a very heavy filter of like a detective story, of a film noir type of story.
Even the intro music is
Yeah.
a mashup of different genres. You know, it starts with
Yeah.
that sort of piano, and then at some point you're rocking out to a guitar, and then it's brought back down again. And at first I found it quite discordant until I realized it sort of sums up the eclectic nature of the story itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. And that final image in the opening of it, it sort of resolves into a profile of her eye, you know. Yeah, yeah, that opening is incredibly well done just all by itself.
Yes, and of course the inclusion of the color purple everywhere, and the
Yeah.
use of color purple. But I don't want to get too far ahead of myself, because there's something else I wanted to say, which is about I think I remember there was I can't remember the name of the film, but it's a Clint Eastwood movie. It was one with Gene Hackman. Do you remember what I'm talking about? Sharon Stone, I think, was in it. Western.
Oh, Unforgiven?
Yes, Unforgiven. I wasn't sure that was
Yes.
the name. And I remember hearing some kind of director talk about that movie and the way that it was lit. It might have been Joss Whedon talking about Firefly, and because he had the same lighting director.
Mm.
And he said he was really amazed at his bravery with black and darkness and shadow in a scene, and basically lighting only as much as you need to see what's going on. And
Yeah.
even though the directors of Daredevil and Jessica Jones, they didn't collaborate, they didn't know how the other person was making their movies, both of them seem to have that same kind of approach, which is, instead of thinking, okay, here's a lit room, what can we put in it? It's like, start with a black, where are the people, and how can we minimally light this in order for the audience to understand what's going on, but not to be afraid of darkness.
Yeah, and that's sort of the part of what makes film noir, at least in terms of its visuals, like a very distinctive style. And again, it's perfect for the theme of Jessica being a detective, because that's what she does. You know, she doesn't live in this world where everything is brightly lit and you can easily perceive who everybody is and where everything is and what's important and what's not. Her existence consists of going into the shadows and seeking things out and figuring out, you know, the answers to her questions. And again, that, to sort of take it back to comic books, that was also an innovation of comic book artists in the 70s and 80s, when they realized, hey, we can control lighting too. Like we don't need to have, you know, we don't need to draw panels where everything is just flatly brightly lit. We can incorporate shadow. We can set a scene for readers where you only see a small portion of what's going on in a room, and the rest of it is in shadow. And yeah, and it's again, it's just an incredibly effective technique, you
Yeah.
know, because it puts us in the same situation that the characters are in, where we can't see everything.
I was noticing the way that the fluorescent lighting, a lot of it was lit always from sort of top down. You know, fluorescent lights a lot of the time with, so the light was sort of always kind of cutting into scenes. And then in the police station scene, actually David Tennant makes reference to the fluorescent lights.
Yes.
I mean, I considered it like an inside joke to myself, because I was one I had made. But yeah, just sort of pointing out, yes, we have this ugly fluorescent lighting in every scene, or most scenes.
Yeah. And that's, I think the show is that smart. You know what I mean? I think that was probably, you know, when they wrote his character having that line, I'm sure that that was part of the intention, you know, to see like, ooh, this is how we've lit, you know, every episode of the show so far. And of course, if there's going to be one character in the show that would make such a comment, it would be Kilgrave. And he would say something like, oh, these bloody fluorescent lights, you know?
It's perfect coming out of his mouth.
Yeah.
Yeah. And then also I noticed in Daredevil, one of the things that struck me almost immediately was the way that the director had framed so many shots as if you were looking at a comic book. So even the opening scene in the confessional, it's a very still interaction. And a lot of times things are, you could almost do a screenshot and it could be a panel in a comic book. But Jessica Jones was very dynamic. It was moving around a lot, and there was some really interesting use of camera angle or movement. I'm thinking in particular at the end of the first episode where the camera follows her after the elevator doors open and she sees the horror. It follows her out of the building, down the stairs to the taxi, and then follows her, turns 360 and goes back up to the building, which I thought was phenomenal. But then I was like, well, why do I still get the feeling this is a comic book? And when I watched it the second time, because I have the benefit of having watched it twice, I noticed, and I was thinking about the fact that, you know, we're looking at mainly female characters, but what I noticed about the physical surroundings is that there were always geometric lines or right angles. And that use of sort of boxing people into window frames or boxing people into doorways, lots of lines, always sort of like gave you possibility almost of framing different parts of the scene to make it look like a panel. So I don't know if that was something you picked up on, or maybe I'm just talking crazy talk.
No, you're not talking crazy talk at all. I think that's right on. That's the sort of creating frames within frames, you know, and again, sort of reinforcing our role as the audience, because how many times, again, especially in the early episodes when we see Jessica being a detective much more than when it gets more into the her versus Kilgrave story, we often see her observing characters through windows or through doorways, and we see her framed through windows and doorways. And yeah, that is a mimicking of a comic book panel, and I think it's also a mimicking of the fact that what we as the audience are also looking at her through a window of sorts, you know. And again, I mean, it's not an uncommon technique of filmmakers. I mean, one of my favorite, perhaps my favorite filmmaker ever, Buster Keaton, used to do that all the time. He would constantly create frames within frames and use, you know, the geometry of a set to sort of frame people inside the camera frame to draw our attention to it or to make reference to something. And it's really effective because it's a way of sort of reminding you as the audience that that's what you're doing, but without taking you out of the movie. It doesn't, they're not breaking the fourth wall and reminding you explicitly what you're watching is a movie, what you're watching isn't real, but they're showing you that this is, you know, what Jessica is doing when she watches Luke through his bedroom window from the street or from the across the street. That's sort of what you're doing right now through the window of your TV or your computer or wherever you happen to be watching the show.
I think there was one scene where they were framed within scaffolding. And I was like, that's amazing. You know, you just have them stop and have the actors perform the scene within the scaffold square. And it's like, you know, again, like a window, like you were saying. This is phenomenal.
Absolutely.
So those were my like big points that I wanted to bring up in terms of how they created some of the mood, and I've kind of been leading and dominating the conversation. So I want to take a little bit of a step back and see if there are other things that topic that you wanted to bring up or maybe you missed.
Well, I like the fact that you actually get to see her being a detective. You know, having a detective story, having a film noir type story. I mean, it gives you the chance to present things in a certain way visually that we've been talking about that is really wonderful. And also I really appreciated the fact that in the way the show was written, and this was carried forward really through the entire series, even when her focus became more exclusively on Kilgrave. You get to see that she's a detective and that she's a good detective. You know, one of the problems, or not necessarily a problem, but something that I have often missed from the Batman movies is that you very rarely see him being a detective. You know, the Batman movies highlight his superhero side and the side that, you know, he has all these gadgets and he's great in a fight and he has a cool costume and he lives in a cave and all this stuff. But you very rarely get to see him being a detective. And with Jessica Jones, you get to see her being a detective. She's following leads. She's going through people's trash. She's, you know, calling people and pretending to be someone else just so she can get information. And that's just fascinating to me. The fact that they committed to making it, in addition to all the other things that this show was and all the other ways in which this show dealt with its characters and dealt with its themes, it was very much a detective show. You get to see that she's, it presents her as being a good detective. You know, I really appreciated that.
And also with keeping within the archetype of the stereotype of the archetype maybe is that, the detective who basically gets himself in trouble because he's a good guy and thinks well of people and tries to do something right, and then ends up sort of on his own anyway because someone took advantage of him or it didn't work out,
Yeah.
And so I'm thinking about in the middle where Kilgrave says there's a possibility for them to work together to fix things, and she confronts this moral thing, and she has a lot of things to go through, but at the end she ends up just like the detective in the black and white noir movies, still alone in your office at the end as well. So it keeps in that genre in the closing, like you said. So
yeah, and she's a classic noir character in many ways. She's a classic noir hero and so is Luke. Actually, Luke Cage is another classic sort of archetypal noir character, like people who are essentially good people but are conflicted or haunted by something, who end up over their head or involved in a situation that sort of goes out of their control that they never really wanted to be in the first place. That's again like a classic noir story type, and we see that in Jessica Jones very much. And what makes it such a joy is the very creative ways in which the creators of the show find of navigating that sort of broad story type.
Yeah, because noir, I think in modern day, it's kind of hard to do. If you said it, I maybe you can think of more examples, but it's just when I look around a lot of things that are being done, you don't see noir like it used to be done. In terms of those, like going in, it's a noir movie and coming out. Maybe what LA Story?
Yeah. It's hard to think. And most of the really good noirs that have been made recently, or like in the last 20 years or so, have been period pieces. Like they take place
back in the
time
day.
when the first noir films were being made. So, even in probably one of the best noir films ever is probably Chinatown, which was made in the 70s, but was set, back in the 40s when, most of the sort of original film noirs were being made. So it's difficult to, it has been done, but it's difficult, I think, to make something that really feels like an authentic noir that is set in a contemporary setting.
Yeah, and maybe part of the helping of transitioning that genre is having a female character tell the story, because it sort of wipes the slate clean in some ways, because you don't know what to expect from a female character or lead in that role. She doesn't have archetypes. There's something like the drinking and other things, but there's not a lot of baggage, and so you can make her do whatever you want, which allows, I think, maybe more of a freedom to run with noir and make noir work for you rather than it being a prison.
Yeah, exactly. And the fact that she's a woman and she can experience many of the same things that a classic male noir hero would, but from a perspective that you don't see nearly as often. Like Jessica feels alienated from larger society, just like a classic male noir hero might feel, but for very different reasons,
Yeah, so it's so you can stay committed to the noir genre without having to the audience predict what's going to happen or it getting boring or that kind of thing. Yeah. So performances, what did you think of the performances in the show?
I thought they were all fantastic. I can't think of an important performance in the series that I thought was lacking. The closest to maybe not even a bad performance, not even close to a bad performance, but maybe just a performance that doesn't jump out at me as being outstanding as the other ones were, was, and I can't think, I feel awful that I can't think of her name, but Ruben's sister. Who wound up being a fantastic character, but just because of the way she was written, she's sort of goofy and sort of like, she has a very certain way about her where she's very pushy and very suspicious of other people and sort of conspiracy minded and just kind of odd and weird. Something about that performance at times kind of stuck out to me when like really serious stuff was happening all around her and she's still being sort of the goofy, funny character. I thought, well, but even that isn't something that really, caused me to put a black mark against the show. The lead performances were all fantastic. I thought Kristen Ritter is just phenomenal as Jessica. The thing she did with that character, with making her so tough, and the the trap that a lot of female heroes fall into in movies and TV shows like this is, I think maybe they lean a bit too hard on vulnerability, because they feel like, I guess maybe if a female character, if a woman isn't shown to be vulnerable and emotional, then we won't relate to it, because we think that's because we think, oh, that's what women are. They're just vulnerable and emotional. And she has that side of her, but she also has this incredibly gritty, tough, determined side that comes through really strongly. And I just thought she did fantastic. And I mean, to write this character in the way that she's really the ultimate empowered victim. I mean, she is a survivor of almost unimaginable abuse. And yet she has such power and such determination and drive to change things in her life, to fight back against the person who abused her, and to try and help other people who have been victims of the same kind of abuse. Is, again, it's just phenomenal. And I think she does such a wonderful job with that character. And on the other side of that, David Tennant is, I mean, Jesus. The things he does with that character, with Kilgrave, are unbelievable. I don't know if I've ever seen something like that in a superhero story, where he is so evil, so incredibly evil, and yet there are moments where you feel sorry for him. It's amazing that they're able to do that simultaneously. They're able to create sympathy for him without ever losing sight of how incredibly evil he is. Yeah, it's amazing. It's amazing.
Yeah, I think on the emotional strength side, what the storytelling benefit of that is, one, you do see her as a very, a person of determination. She's afraid, but she's going forward anyway, all that kind of stuff. But there is the point right before, is it Ruben she finds in bed? There's so many characters, it's hard to keep everybody's names straight, but when she finds the third victim dead in her bed. And she just loses it at that point and starts sort of gasping, almost like, a panic attack. So when she has those moments of breakdown, it makes it a lot more, it has more of an impact. Because you've seen her be strong for all this point, and you see that that's a breaking point for her. And then of course she picks herself up and dusts herself off. And just because you cry doesn't mean you've given up. It just means you're going to go wash your face and get back in the fight. And she just nailed it. I mean, I think all the way through in terms of being consistent where her character would be emotionally, and being able to deliver it too with some comedy. Her darkness and her really straight, really good interaction. Like I was thinking about the interaction at the elevator where Robin, I was telling her off. She's like, "You're a really perceptive asshole." Like the compliment or the acknowledgement first, and then the asshole bit of and with David Tennant, I think it was Willem Dafoe who said about bad guys in an interview, "Do you prefer to play a good guy or bad guy?" And his answer was, "Everybody thinks they're righteous." And looking at it from Tennant, even watching his interviews, and they say, "You're playing this horrible, evil man." He's like, "Well, he's really, got a lot of issues, and he's been, gone through a lot of these things." And so I think Tennant couldn't have really showed that vulnerable side if he wouldn't have come at it from a position of, Kilgrave always thinks he's right, and no one's ever told him he's wrong. And so I think he really got the psychology, or at least the writers did. They worked with the actor to really get him inside and see him and play him as a sympathetic guy. And I have the same reaction. If he was played by a smarmier person, a person that you couldn't connect to, as a character level, he would have just been terrifying, but not as compelling. But because he's David Tennant and he's my favorite Doctor, so that's like immediately like, I want to hate this character, but it's David Tennant. I'm so confused. But you're right. He has a way of both being absolutely terrifying, and then even though he's shown this monstrous side, and that he's a psychopath, feeling sorry for him. And then, like I said, in that moment where they're thinking about, he rescued the family with a guy who was holding his kids hostage, and he felt like a hero. And you think Jessica is actually going to try to join, she's considering joining forces with him, and you're going, well, maybe, like, no, clearly not. But it's that maybe that I think kind of points to, even like on a very superficial level, this is just a character, but if you're in an emotional relationship with somebody who's abusive, you want to see the best in them.
Absolutely.
And so, you know, if we're able to just on something is easy level that we're not emotionally engaged with, you know, be torn by like the charm of a character on the screen, you know, I think that of course also touches on the nature of abuse and violation, which are bigger themes that we're going to get to, I'm sure.
Yeah.
So yeah, I mean, I think it was so well played. And the other thing, I'll stop after this, is that it takes an amazing bad guy for you to have an amazing good guy or good girl or good woman, good gal.
Yeah.
And if his performance hadn't been as strong, her performance wouldn't have meant as much either, because we were so scared shitless of Kilgrave with some of the stuff he pulls. Then our empathy for her courage is there too, in terms of like the risks and just how crazy he is.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and the fact that Tennant doesn't play him, like you said, doesn't play him as someone who thinks of himself as evil. You know, he thinks of himself as completely justified in what he's doing. And that, but in a way that also sort of reinforces how evil he is, because
Right.
he makes it clear that he's not really interested in how other people feel. You know, even when he's trying to be good or trying to be sympathetic, especially when relating to Jessica, it always all comes back to he wants to get what he wants, you know. And even though we see a side of his humanity and we see a side of his, you know, you can see that inside there's something sort of pathetic about him, that he wants people to love him, he wants people to want him, um, but he's willing to override what other people want in order to get that. So even in exploring his humanity, you also are reminded of how twisted and broken he is, and of how dangerous he is. As long as we're discussing performances, we also I can't let it get away without talking about Mike Coulter as Luke Cage, because he was phenomenal. And I love the fact that he was used sparingly in the series. Like, he isn't in every episode. I don't know if he's even in half the episodes. He might, but every episode he's in, he leaves an impact, and he plays an important role, you know, both in Jessica's life and also in the story as a whole. And I mean, Luke Cage is a character that I know a lot of people, especially a lot of friends of mine who are longtime comic book fans, have just been waiting and dying to see this character adapted into a movie or a TV show or something. And I have to imagine that they were happy with how Luke turned out in this series, because he's getting his own show. They're doing a Luke Cage Netflix series after this, which I'm judging by, you know, how he was portrayed in this show, is going to be just terrific. I can't wait to see that. But yeah, Mike Coulter did an amazing job as Luke. Again, same thing that sort of Kristen Ritter did with Jessica, of making him incredibly tough, but also letting us see that, you know, he's had a lot of pain in his life, and letting us see his vulnerable side and his emotional side, without detracting from the fact that he's still a major badass.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Definitely. I mean, you can do that in a character. Like, you can be both and play convincingly. And it's great to see that too, because it isn't just, you know, again, guy in a white hat versus guy in a black hat. These are complicated characters. Yeah. And you tell more interesting stories when you allow your character to explore the full range of what the situation might put them through. Yeah. So, yeah. Okay. Should we get on to the ways in which Jessica Jones is feminist?
Yeah, let's do it, because there's a lot to unpack there.
Yes, quite. So I don't know if you want to start or if you want me to start.
Well, I mean, to me, the most obvious way in which it's feminist, when you look at it in the context of just our larger pop culture, our larger sort of entertainment industry, the most obvious and also maybe the most important way is that there are just so many important characters who are women. The women dominate and drive this story in a way that is rarely seen, especially in something like a superhero story, that even though there have been strides made in this area, it's still sort of automatically perceived as like a guy thing. You know, superheroes, that's like a guy thing. You know, yeah, I know there are some women who are into it, but it's mostly a guy thing. And this story is driven by and dominated by the women. And there are multiple scenes in the many episodes of this series where there are 4 or 5 characters on screen, and they're all important characters, and they're all women. Um, and when we talk about, you know, how much sexism there is in popular media, or how many the double standards with the way women are portrayed versus men in films and TV series, one of the best ways to fix that is to simply feature more women in more important roles, regardless of the political intentions of the piece, regardless of whatever message the creators mean to send. Just simply include more women in in the work, not just, and of course not just on screen, but also behind the scenes, which is something else that this show did.
Yes.
Yeah, so that's the first point I would make about the feminist aspect of it.
Yeah, I think when do you remember, I mean, if you don't, it's fine, but do you remember there being a moment when you realized there are a lot of women in this show?
Yeah. Well, I realized there were a lot of women in the show fairly early on, just because I mean there are just lots and lots of really important women in the show, and they're given, and they're not just there to, you know, to talk about the men, or to be involved in the man's story. Like it's Jessica's story, and the supporting characters, male and female, are there to sort of be in her story. There was a scene in, it was one of the later episodes. It was the scene, I think it was the scene at Hogarth's soon-to-be ex-wife's house when they had the big fight after Kilgrave tells her wife to, you know, give her the death of 1,000 cuts,
Yeah.
and then Hogarth's mistress comes in, and then Jessica comes in, and it's like, so at this point we're at like I think 4 characters in the scene that have all been important characters in the story, uh, and they're all women. And I thought, wow, for some reason it just occurred to me, and I thought, wow, there are all of these people are incredibly important characters in this story. They're all women. They're all here in this scene, you know. And it just occurs to me that you see that sort of thing with male characters all the time in TV and movies, but you very rarely see that where it's all the characters are women. And I think it just drives home the fact that this show is, without being in your face about this is feminist, this is progressive, you know, we're fighting sexism. It's not like that at all. It's just telling a story
Yeah,
about people who are mostly women, you know?
I compare it with Supergirl, which is quite obviously, I think, embarrassed for its name and has always been trying to make up
Yeah.
for it since then. But yeah, I have a similar, like, I was just watching the first episode and I'm like, oh, a lesbian couple, that's new.
Yeah.
Like, that's okay. And then I'm going on in the movie and she's got her best friend Trish, and I'm like, yeah, there's like, it took me too a really long time to notice that there, when, you know, even when we got male characters introduced, they would kind of fade, you know, and they came up a little bits, but a lot of the main characters were women, but it wasn't something that was, like you said, you know, in your face, or it was just a story being told with women characters. And I watched, screened actually, Misrepresentation, the documentary about women in the media,
Mm.
and one of the women they talked to about Hollywood was saying that one of the problems is that there's this myth that women will watch stories about men, but men won't watch stories about women. And executives make decisions on whether or not to greenlight something on that assumption all the time. And so things that feature women aren't being made, so men don't have a chance to enjoy them. And
Yeah.
Jessica Jones is obviously a really great example. Is if you have a great story with great characters, people are going to love it. Doesn't matter who, if it's a man or a woman in the title role. If you tell good stories, people will watch it. And that's what I think it
Absolutely.
does. Yeah.
Yeah, and it's not, it totally breaks that mold, that sort of stereotype of, well, it has to be a girl thing or a boy thing, you know. And I think the recent Star Wars movie shows this to be fallacious as well, you
Right.
know. I mean, because I mean, lots of guys have gone to see the new Star Wars movie and thought it was great, and I'm one of them. And most of them, nearly all of them, don't seem to mind or even really notice that it's noteworthy that the main character is a woman. You know, I mean, people like us who think about these sorts of issues in a critical way might go see a Star Wars movie with a female lead and think, oh, that's so awesome, that's so great. But most people who don't care about this sort of thing or don't think about it probably just thought, well, what a great movie.
Mm-hmm.
They weren't walking out of the theater going, I'm so glad that there was an empowered woman in the lead role. They didn't even notice. And the same thing with Jessica Jones. I think most people who are comic book fans or Netflix subscribers who just said, oh, people are talking about this, let me check this out. You know, they're not watching it going, oh, that's so great that, you know, the female characters have such agency in the story. They're just watching it and enjoying it. And it doesn't even occur to them that there's anything special about it, because they just don't care about that kind of context. They're just not interested in that, which again is the way is
This is what feminists would say. Yeah, this is it. This is what we want. Just make stuff like this from time to time.
Exactly.
That's it.
Yeah.
See, it can be good. It can be awesome. You know, if you don't get caught up in it. Yeah, and the other thing is when I went back to watch it, just to remind myself, you know, some of the important storylines before we had this discussion, I went back knowing that it was going to be, you know, I'm like, okay, I'm looking at this for women's roles and feminist themes. And that's when I picked up in the first episode, even all of the major exposition comes from women. It comes from her mom when they're sat in the office with the dad is trying to hang the door, you know, and trying to be helpful. When she goes to talk to her Hope's friend, you know, the guy's filming with his lifelong documentary or whatever, he's documentary in 1 year. And so the woman also, her friend has the exposition. I was like, wow, yeah, women do a lot of the driving of the story in this right from the get-go. And even though I watch quite a lot of procedural, you know, kind of crime shows when I'm trying to relax, it didn't occur to me till ages later how important all the female characters were in that storyline.
Absolutely. They drive the story. The story would not be possible without them. And I also think it's worth noting that one of the major conflicts in the story of Jessica Jones, both for Jessica herself and for a lot of the other characters, is the notion that when they're talking about their experience with Kilgrave, that they will not be believed. And this sort of ties into the if we look at it as an abuse allegory, you know, one of the most persistent obstacles to Kilgrave's victims, when trying to get help, when trying to get people from outside that experience to take them seriously and to help them, is that people just simply don't believe them. That's a very big thing too. And when I realized that when I was watching the series, and that really came through to me, that was like, you know, a slap in the face. Like, wow. Like when you see what it is doing in an allegorical way, not in an in-your-face way, it really it takes on a whole new sort of really powerful dimension.
Yeah, and in that is one of the examples that I think what the storytellers have done. Again, not necessarily putting it in your face, but from the position of like abuse victims, or in this case, a woman who's been abused, not being believed. Of course, Kilgrave victimized lots of people, and they all had that common theme. Yeah. But then there were certain storylines that were really uniquely tied to women's experiences. So the abortion storyline that came in, two women who are married, and then one of them has an affair, and they go through a messy divorce. And you know what? The one who's angry tries to get money away from the person that cheated on them. Yeah. That happens in, you know, and so you saw a lot of these like things that we've, you know, things that we haven't seen before, like the abortions are really not discussed much in American entertainment. Yeah. And then of course the issue of rape comes up, and so you just see a lot of these experiences exclusively through the lives of the women who are living them. But it does give you a different perspective and a different element to the story than if it had just been done with a kind of traditional male character being the attorney, Jerry.
Yeah. Oh, very much. Yeah, very much. And just the fact that, again, as you said, so many of the storytellers within the story are women, you know, and to have that be the narrative choice that you make, where the stories within the story are being told by women for the most part, and then to have a major conflict in the story be, you know, the victims of Kilgrave, who aren't, yeah, as you say, are certainly not all women. He does this to quite a few men as well. But to have it be, well, I don't believe that, you know, I don't see how anything bad could have happened, you know? Yeah.
And I also think that it's probably interesting, again, with adult content for men to see the storyline with like the pregnancy in the situation, and and at that point you're very much empathizing with Hope. Yeah. And so to have that kind of empathy in what was done to her and the bind she's in, and trying to empathize with why she feels that she needs to do what she needs to do. And also when Jessica confronts Kilgrave about rape, and that interaction between them, which I just watched again today, just because I wanted to really pick up on the nuance of David Tennant's performance in that scene, because it's, I think it's very I was captivated by it because of how he interpreted his actions and other people's
Yeah.
actions in that scene. So I don't know if there's one what you want to pick up on out of that.
Yeah. Oh no, that is such a fascinating scene and such a gripping scene. And that is, yeah, that's the scene where the rape ceases to become allegory and becomes content, becomes actual subject matter of the story, because Jessica comes right out and says, "You raped me." So now we're not dealing with Kilgrave and what he does as a metaphor. We're dealing with, no, he is literally a rapist, and his most abused, or arguably his most abused victim, has now accused him of this explicitly. And his response is, "No, I'm not." And it's that he doesn't deny anything he's ever done. When she says, "You raped me," he doesn't deny any of the things that he made her do. He just doesn't see it that way. He says, "Oh, but you had such a good time. We did everything you wanted. We went to the best restaurants. We went everywhere you wanted to go."
And he
And
also says, how was I supposed to know? How do I know what you really want? Everyone is doing it. Maybe you really wanted it. And, this comes
yeah,
back to like an impairment situation where someone's really too drunk to consent. Like,
yeah,
well, you're saying yes when you were drunk. How was I to know? And so his denial, and also the way he flinches at it and says he hates that word, I think because it confronts him with part of himself that he doesn't want to acknowledge or see, or rationales away. And
yeah,
so it wasn't really rape. He finds a
yeah,
way to make it not really rape. It wasn't rape because I didn't know. Maybe you really wanted it. So then
yeah.
it wasn't rape.
And it also sort of plays into the sympathetic part of his character, because when he voices that conflict that he has, when he says, I think in that conversation, you don't know what it's like for me, because I never know if people are doing what I ask them to because they really want to, or because of my power. Like I live in this world where I never know whether people are complying because they like me or because I'm forcing them to. And again, I mean, that arouses a little bit of sympathy for him.
Yeah, you
But
go, you're right. If you think about
yeah,
it, you never know, you can't tell. And yeah. And so I backed that up. I was also
yeah,
had the same reaction of that would be horrible
yeah.
to never know.
But then I think the choice that the show makes, and the choice that Jessica makes as well, is, but that doesn't matter anymore. You know, it's one thing to see you as a human being and to have some sympathy for you, for your backstory and how you were abused by your parents, and how you are now sort of trapped in this situation where, because of this power you have, maybe life isn't so great for you either. It's one thing to acknowledge that, but the things you have done cannot be overlooked. And the harm you have caused, whether you thought you were causing harm or not, far outweighs whatever sympathy I might have for you because of your experience or because of your humanity. And that's sort of the choice that Jessica has to make in the story. And I think that's also the choice that the filmmaker sort of put to us. We'll show you that he's not pure evil. We'll show you that he's a human being, that he has, tragedy in his life, that he has his own, that he does have moments of doubt. He does have moments of guilt, even if he doesn't really show it very often, and he does have a very sort of yearning at his core, where he there are things about Kilgrave that everybody can relate to: wanting to be loved, wanting to be wanted, wanting to be respected, wanting other people to care about his happiness, but his crimes are just inexcusable. And even though you can say, yes, he's not pure evil, that ultimately that isn't really important. Jessica has to make the choice of, do I allow this person to continue harming people, even though he may genuinely not feel that he's doing that? And I think that's also an important message. If you're going to take a message about the survivor narrative or the abuse narrative from the show, that's a very important message, is, understanding the humanity of an abuser is important. Uh, but the most important thing is to keep them from victimizing people.
Yeah.
You know?
Seeing his humanity is actually a reflection of our humanity.
Yeah.
And in Kilgrave's case, he is a sociopath or a psychopath. I'm not sure which is the medical term, but those things that make us feel bad for him just feed his narcissism, as you were saying. Yeah, and there was a point I was thinking of while you were talking, and now it's gone. So maybe if we keep going, it'll come back. But I think it had to do with now. Yeah, it's gone. So what we were just talking. Oh, I remember what it is now. It's that when Jessica and Malcolm, Jessica confronts Kilgrave and uses the word rape on him. I think what she does is, and for people who view it too, what's really scary about Kilgrave is that I think all of us can imagine how horrible it would be. Hopefully nobody is, for people who've experienced, who have to go through a sexual assault, have your body violated against your will. But then when you get to a character that engages in mind control, you can kind of have it two ways, right? You can have it where they control your body, but you're still kind of in control of your mind and it's happening to you, but you are doing things and you don't want to do them, but they're happening. But Kilgrave's violation goes farther than that. He makes you want to do the things.
Yeah.
And that's a kind of deep, I think, a way of violating you as a character, that, in terms of like thinking about that as a thing that really kind of strikes down to the core of his, that kind of evil. And maybe by making it that kind of profound conceptual, almost thought experiment for people, you can then maybe extend out a little bit more sympathy for people who have been violated when against their consent. And so this whole thing about autonomy, agency, dignity, and violations and these kinds of things. There's a lot of stuff in this series that you could pull out and talk about.
Oh yeah, I mean, just the revelation relatively late in the show when Jessica realizes that he can't control her anymore. I mean, that's a big one.
And you're also talking about survivor narrative parallels.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. When you realize as a survivor that the person who hurt you doesn't have power over you, and you're free to act in your own interests or according to your own free will. And when Jessica realizes that, I mean, it's a big deal in the story because it means that she now has more ability to fight him than she thought she did. But in terms of the allegory of the survivor narrative, that's huge. And how wonderful that, the weakness of Kilgrave, the villain, is that the person that he has abused can no longer be controlled by him. I mean, just the way they're able to fit that sort of meta narrative about survivors and abuse into the story that they're telling, the plot of their superhero story, is just amazing. Like it's really, really amazing.
To reference Labyrinth, you have no power over me.
Exactly.
A little Bowie shout out there.
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the fact that it goes that when they get to the end of the series, that they do allow it to go in more or less the expected places. Like the end of the series, the end of Jessica and Kilgrave is probably the ending that most of us would have predicted, at least in terms of what actually happened. The good guy kills the bad guy. There wasn't like a big twist at the end where, Kilgrave is still alive or he escapes or whatever. But that's what makes it so powerful. That's sort of not just the hero vanquishing the villain within the story, but the symbolic vanquishing of the survivor sort of ridding herself of the person that has abused her in a symbolic way and saying, this is not going to be a part of my life anymore. And again, it was a predictable ending, but it was the right ending.
As you said, these sort of standalone things, they're meant to have closure. You're meant to get closure.
Yeah, exactly.
Don't be disappointed. It's over. Just enjoy it. Go watch it again if you want to.
Absolutely.
Yeah. And also one of the things too, in terms of that whole victimizer allegory, is that even when Kilgrave is allowing what he thinks is allowing Jessica to exercise her own free will, he's always using coercion. He always is coercing her by threatening her with harming other people. So even his giving her free will is fake because he's got it basically her cornered, he thinks, in every direction to make sure that she doesn't go too far off the reservation. So, even this idea of, if you try to operate with some autonomy, that other person blackmailing you or threatening others because you care about them in order to get them to get you to do what they want. all
Yeah.
forms of manipulation.
And we should also mention, as long as we're talking about like characters manipulating each other, and just characters behaving in ways that sort of raise parallels to survivor abuser relationships, the way that the relationship between Trish and Sergeant Simpson evolves throughout the series can also be viewed that way, where even though it seems like, because Simpson is someone who is also a Kilgrave survivor and is really sort of torn up about that. But he also doesn't really, I mean, he seems like a good guy at first, and he probably is, and he seems like someone who's trying to do the right thing, but he also sort of crosses boundaries
Yes.
that he shouldn't cross, even when he's himself, even when he's trying to do good. I mean, there's something about that scene when he waits outside Trish's apartment, and he ends up giving her the gun and saying, well, I just wanted you to be safe. Like that comes from a good place. Like, that's nice. But there's something that's just really wrong about that, to when you go up to someone's apartment where you're not supposed to be, and you knock on their door and they say, you can't come in, go away, and you just hang around for the rest of the day. That's not okay. Like what Simpson does in that situation is not okay. Even though he might not be a bad guy through and through, what he does isn't okay. And then of course, eventually he does kind of turn into sort of a bad guy.
By the end. Yeah, and the problem I had with his character was that whenever he came on screen, the voice from the guy from CinemaSins would come into my head and say, "Discount Captain America."
Yes. I totally get that.
Yeah. It's distracting, but
I did, especially when he started taking the pills and he was like kind of a super soldier. I was like, oh. He even kind of looks like Captain America.
That's it. Like when you see him in profile, I was like, oh, it's Captain America. Wait, no, it's not. No, Discount Captain America.
Why would Captain America do this?
He's so mean. Can you believe that it's already almost been an hour?
No.
We're 4 minutes away from the top of the hour, which, wow, that went by really super fast. And I know you've got other things to do today, so I don't want to keep you, I don't want to, it's suddenly been an hour and 20 minutes and I keep you off schedule. Yeah. So
well, we can keep going for a little bit if you have time. I mean,
yes.
I don't have to run off right now.
No, the next thing is I'm going to have dinner with Dad, and then we're going to watch some football, even though the Packers lost last night. He stayed up till 4 a.m. watching. Oh, wow. And he actually turned off the television 3 minutes before it ended because he didn't think the Packers were going to do it. And he was really glad he did the next day because it went into overtime and they lost anyway. He would have been up to like 5:30 in the morning in Germany just to watch them lose in overtime. Man. But we're going to watch some more football together. They have the local station here allows us to do it. So I can chat for a little bit longer. Basically, it's a long answer to a short question. I'm trying to think if there's another theme that comes out, which is from my notes, PTSD. And this is coming to the survivor analogy and other things. And the way that they approached the issue of PTSD and the way it worked in the storyline. Your thoughts on that?
Well, that was actually, again, it was something that I didn't necessarily expect. I like the fact that the series, as it went on, it continued to sort of include people who had been under Kilgrave's influence, and show us that like this isn't something that you just get over, and again, it sort of departs from a typical superhero story where in a typical superhero story, it might be that, well, you're under the mind control of the evil villain, but then once you snap out of it, you're just sort of like, oh, huh? And then you go on with your life. And this is completely the opposite. Even people that Kilgrave only controlled to do relatively benign things are haunted by it, are scarred very terribly by this experience. I mean, there are cases like Jessica or like Hope or like Malcolm where, Kilgrave just ruined their lives. But there are also people who, Kilgrave just made me drive him around for a little bit, or Kilgrave just made me say something or do something that I didn't want to say. And it's a trauma that they just can't get over, and that's taken seriously. I mean, Jessica sort of scoffs at the idea of the support group because I don't think that's just who she is. But Jessica also knows that what those people are going through is very real and very serious. I mean, I think Jessica, you could say that Jessica has at least manifests something consistent with PTSD because of her drinking, because of her sort of self-destructive behavior because she pushes people away and isolates people. I mean, we sort of get hints that she was kind of like that before, that, you know, when we see her as a child, she sort of has that standoffish sort of attitude, but
especially
her,
early on, you know, when
yeah,
Kilgrave's not in the picture yet, the flashes of Tennant you get early on licking your face or
yeah,
yeah.
yeah. But, you know, I mean, Kilgrave clearly sort of drove her further in that direction where she just wants to isolate herself from people. And, you know, she'll do the private detective thing to make a living, but she doesn't romanticize it. She really resists looking at herself as a hero. And she's just, yeah, she's incredibly racked by guilt of things that she's done. You know, that's how she comes in contact with Luke, because she's following Luke out of, you know, some feeling of responsibility or guilt because of what she did to Luke's wife, even though she wasn't ultimately responsible for that. You know, so yeah, the PTSD thing is definitely a big deal.
And I like what you said about the support group. What you noticed is, or noted about it, was that it was that you were violated. That
Yeah,
was what connected them. It was not how you were violated or how often you were violated, but the violation itself is the starting point. And then, you know, people had their different experiences, and that's the same with lots of types of abuse. And I think a lot of people, it's not. I think it's been established that victims will say, well, you know, it happens to other people, but it wasn't so bad for me. You know,
yeah,
I only got hit a few times a year. I wasn't getting hit every week. So, but that support group point that you make was that everybody there was a victim, and they had that feeling of violation, just like any kind of, you know, crime where somebody is violated. That's still a violation. And yeah, other people might have been violated more times or in a more violent way, but there was still a violation, and not to discount it. So yeah, I think the whole idea of the you know, support group being very inclusive, it probably wasn't overtly meant to communicate anything, but it does insofar as the
yeah,
variety of experiences, and that there aren't inauthentic experiences. Oh yeah, and that was also just one of the phrases I noticed in the scene when Kilgrave and Jessica were together in the house was he qualified it by saying, you know, if you've given me your genuine consent,
yeah,
versus just
yeah,
consent here.
yeah,
And yeah, that's the connection of that, us thinking what it would be like to have somebody not only make you do things, but make you want to do things in the
yeah.
moment.
Yeah. And, you know, it's also, it's significant that in those scenes between the two of them at her old house, that Jessica doesn't yet know that Kilgrave can't control her, but we find out later that Kilgrave does, you know. So he presents it to her as though, I'm such a nice guy and I don't want to use my powers to influence you. I really care about you and I want you to genuinely choose to be with me. And then we find out later that actually, no, he just has no choice. You know, he would have surely used his power on her if he could have.
Eddie
He just
could.
couldn't.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. Fantastic. Oh, the other thing that I really, the dialogue felt so real.
Yeah.
And maybe that's because it's on Netflix. It doesn't swear for effect.
No.
But it doesn't have the PG rating of, you know, Agents of S.H.I.E.L.D. either. And as a consequence, the world feels very like you could pass easily through the veil and walk right into that Hell's Kitchen.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, just in general, I think the fact that because it was a Netflix show that they felt they could sort of loosen things up a little bit in terms of language, and also in terms of the sexuality of the characters. I mean, uh, I don't think there are any F bombs. Nobody says fuck in the dialogue, but, you know, there's lots of other sort of loose, casual profanity in the dialogue. And, you know, I don't think there's any like explicit nudity, but we see, you know, these characters are real people and they have sex and it's a
Yeah.
part of their lives. And the sex in the show is not used in a sort of a salacious or a titillating way. It's used to show us who these people are. You know, when Jessica and Luke have sex with each other and realize, and especially when they realize that they have superpowers
Yeah.
and they can be themselves with each other.
Yeah.
Like it's meaningful to the characters. It's not just, hey, superhero sex. It's, you know, they're two people who have to keep, you know, completely closed off to the rest of the world because Luke especially doesn't want anybody to know that he's indestructible or that he has these abilities. and to, oh my God, I finally found someone that I can just be myself with, and I can just sort of, relax and be a normal person. That it's meaningful. It's not just, hey, we got two superheroes, we got to get them into bed. People will love that,
Yeah, it's not the cops going to the strip bar to quiz the guy, and then he meets the stripper and whatever else. Yeah, I mean,
Exactly.
yeah, the first time, I mean, Jessica Jones is not really sexualized at all, even though she's a
No.
sexual being, as her, her character is. And then, one of the earlier, when the pilot or the opening episode, you see her on the toilet.
Yeah.
And she doesn't make an effort to be sexual, and yet you see her having relationships and being a sexual person, but that doesn't define her. It's just one part of her life, just like it is with a
Yeah.
lot of guy characters. But you don't
Exactly.
see that with women characters, and that's what's so refreshing and nice about it.
Exactly. Even in a lot of the movies and TV shows that do have really strong women as lead characters, you rarely see them having a sexual side of their personality. That is either ignored, or there's something about them that explains why they don't date or why they don't have sex. And you rarely see that with male characters. And it's refreshing to see that you can show that she's a normal person who has a social life, who has a sex life, who has that side of her personality, like many people do, but it doesn't define her. She's not presented as an object of titillation for the audience.
I would compare it to like Castle, which I like,
Yeah.
but oh my God, she's so hot, it's distracting to me. I want to see her naked. She's just like,
Right.
wears the most amazing, she's always running around in stilettos. The woman who plays her is just like, yeah. And so, yeah, she's supposed to be a tough cop, but she's a tough cop in stiletto heels, and there's a ridiculous to run in. It's so impractical. You just look at it, go, get some flats, sister, take a load off.
Right. And then another example of that from sort of the other side would be a character like Agent Scully on the X-Files, who is one of my favorite characters ever, just a fantastic character, but had almost no sex life at all.
Androgynous almost.
Yeah. So yeah, Jessica Jones, sort of, you get to have it both ways. You get to have a really strong action detective character who is a woman, but also you don't sort of just ignore the fact that she has a sex life,
Yeah, like women in real life.
Exactly. Weird, right?
And again, it's just so refreshing to see like a 360, in sort of the similar way that the camera work is occasionally, does 360s. You get the full, complete human person,
Yeah.
But within the woman's body and in the woman's experience.
Yeah, absolutely.
All right. Okay, I'm running out of things to say. We've talked about all the cool things that I wanted to talk to you about and get your perspective on, and I'm really thrilled about that. Yeah, this is, so I'm just going to end one more time, throw it up and see if there's anything else that you want to.
Well, I guess I hope that because this series has been so successful, that a lot of people have talked about it, and the reviews of it have been incredibly positive. I hope that this sort of encourages Marvel and maybe other studios as well that have control of not even just superhero characters, but characters that they know would appeal to a broad audience, to use those characters to tell stories like this, because the only other, when we talk about Jessica Jones using its superhero story as also like an allegory for something very serious, like surviving abuse, surviving sexual abuse. The only other example I can think of off the top of my head of a superhero story doing that in this same way, where it seems like it's very clearly intentional on the part of the filmmakers, is Ang Lee's Hulk movie, which everybody hates, but I think is beautiful and brilliant. And in Ang Lee's Hulk movie, the metaphor is like the rage of the Hulk represents surviving child abuse. The source of Bruce Banner's anger is his abused childhood. And since then, the only time that I can see like a similar allegory, a similar metaphor being drawn in a superhero story is Jessica Jones, where, the story can be enjoyed just flatly as a great detective story, a great action story, but also has all of these really powerful parallels and allusions to a survivor story. And I hope that they realize that you can do that you can take that people making superhero adapted TV shows and movies realize the same thing that comic book writers and artists realized about 25 or 30 years ago, that in addition to telling the really fun, crowd-pleasing adventure stories that we all love these characters for, you can also use them to do things that are very literary and very serious, and to explore issues that, you know, that art at its best has always sought to explore. So that's what I would hope.
Yeah, getting the audience to think. And actually, I'm glad you said that, because then it brought up another topic that we can use to extend this enjoyable conversation a little bit, which is, yeah, the reviews. And I've been seeing, when I talk about the reviews, I went on YouTube mostly to see what other people's reviews of it were. And I found, I think, nearly universal was guys doing movie reviews, because I've noticed it's kind of a white guy dominated genre in YouTube is movies. But it was a lot of things, so I don't want to pick on them. But but it was interesting in that they were talking about this film and talking about things like rape and the other elements of it, and all of the guys were just like in love with the story. Like they just like really got into the story. They loved the performances. They loved the themes, and we're talking about, I mean, the some of the points about like telling women to smile. Came up from a guy who I'm sure would never consider himself a feminist, but he was just pointing to the fact that, why is it that, you know, a woman has to smile to make a guy feel happy? Why is it her job to smile for you? And that's what Kilgrave asks, is smile. And that's what Hope says to Jessica after she shoots her parents. It's like, smile. And it's the name of the last episode as well, is smile. And it's what she kind of makes him do with his face when she's holding him up before she breaks his neck. It makes him smile. You know, it says it, doesn't she? It says smile.
She says smile, yeah.
Yeah, that sort of like little manipulation. And so for me, it was just really fascinating to see guys that I don't think have had feminist theory courses or a gender, you know, any kind of perspective in that way, picking up on these things and really expanding them and enjoying their existence in the piece as something new and thinking about something in a new way. So it feels from the YouTube fan base, basically, like the whole idea, the criticism that, say, Star Wars faced for having a major lead, the lead being a female. I didn't really see any feminists have taken over Jessica Jones, or this feminist piece of trash that makes men look terrible. Look at all the bad guys are men, and this is about, you know, victimizing white males, especially British white males, or something, you know. I didn't see any of that, and it was really great to see. But I don't know your other reaction. Have you seen any of the reactions or read any of the reviews?
No, I haven't done like a super deep dive into the critical reaction. I just sort of am aware of what the consensus has been, and it's been incredibly, almost universally positive, you know. And it's really wonderful to see that a show like this, that sort of is, that we would consider a step forward in many ways in terms of its, you know, its social or political or whatever implications, that it has been accepted so enthusiastically. And you're right. I mean, people who maybe are just superhero fans, who have never given a moment's thought to feminism or to rape survivors or rape culture or any of these other things, who don't have any familiarity with these concepts at all, can still watch this show and have some basic familiarity with it, you know, or you can watch it, you can see survivors struggling to deal with their experience. You can see people fighting back against their abusers. You can see why what Kilgrave does is wrong, you know, and understand that, even if you've never taken a single class, you've never put any thought into it, you've never read a single article written by a single woman or anybody else on this topic, you can get it in a general basic sense. That's a really exciting thing. And again, I hope it's something that happens again, you know.
I mean, of course, you know, the character, where she goes from there, this will always be its own story, and so we'll see, you know, where hopefully, where they take it forward, and it will be as good in the future. But it was really, for me, very inspiring. Again, just not because it had a label on it, not because a certain person had, you know, said something about it, just guys, again, because that's who are making the videos, guys watching this, binging it because they just got into it, finding Kilgrave terrifying, finding the idea of that kind of violation terrifying, you know, bringing up the fact that they went there on the rape topic, they said that word and they had the confrontation. All of that I just found so positive. And I know people are going to say, well, they're not being explicitly feminist. And like, well, it doesn't have to be explicitly feminist to be feminist. you can do consciousness raising and have these kinds of conversations to elevate topics and realize inequities or problems in this that need to be solved without always having to label the person behind it as a feminist. Because ideally, feminism is a set of ideas. You know, it's not individuals on Tumblr. It's a value system about equality and also giving voice to people who don't have a voice, especially in this case. Sometimes it's ethnic background and racism, but in this case, it's about the traditionally marginalized and silenced views of women. And to have, again, to see three guys sitting around talking about rape in a film and the characters and the idea of consent, I was just like, this is phenomenal. This is great.
Yeah, and the show suggests those conversations because that issue of consent and of violation is at the very heart of the show, you know. And whether you look at it as an allegory for sexual abuse or whether you look at it as just what it is on the surface, that it's there. You know, that's an unavoidable part of the story, and the fact that it gets people to talk about it and think about it is wonderful. And yeah, I mean, maybe they'll never think about it again, other than watching this show, or maybe it will inform the way they think and the way they act and the way they speak and, you know, the way they treat people from now on. Maybe someone might make an uncomfortable association between something that they have done and something Kilgrave does. You know, I mean, I would imagine that happens quite often, you know, where you see Kilgrave doing something and you think, oh shit, like maybe I've been that way before in a way. Maybe I've been too manipulative. Maybe I've been too, you know, eager to disregard what someone else wants in order to get what I want. And that could be something that is very important, very positive too, you know, because like we've said, I mean, Kilgrave is an incredibly magnetic and charming character, but he's also just, I mean, almost unimaginably evil when you really think about the things that he does in this story and the things that he is said to have done before we pick this story up. You know, it's difficult to imagine how evil this guy is, the harm that this guy has caused. And, you know, yeah.
In terms of the concept of evil, I had a friend, we were sat in a bar in a small village in England, and there was a British person around the table, a British guy, his German girlfriend, myself, and maybe a few other people. But we got talking about, because they were, most of them were philosophers, got talking about what is evil. And the woman who is German, my friend, said, well, for me, what defines evil is I lose the ability to empathize or sympathize with your actions. When you get to that point, when you're doing things that you've moved beyond my realm of empathy and sympathy, that for me is evil. And I think that's an interesting way to look at Kilgrave, because like you said, he's very charming, and David Tennant plays him so well because he is that kind of, he can do little subtle movements, things that just kind of draw you in, because his acting can be, at one hand, overstated, and the other hand, so subtle with just looks. And so you always are kind of paying attention to him when he's on the screen. But fundamentally, like you said, you can have empathy for maybe the things that he was feeling, but when it comes to what he's done, you just have to move him into a different category. And I would say, so I'm kind of babbling on that, but there was one last point that I wanted to bring up, which you touched on at the beginning of the show, and I think is really important. We should be explicit about before we wrap this up, which is who is behind the camera and who is behind the writing that made these perspectives possible. And I think you might know a bit more about that than me, just because you're a nerd on these kinds of things. And I'm aware of that women were incredibly important to this from my watching YouTube reviews and stuff. But do you want to first start out, and then if I know anything else that you haven't added, I can throw that into.
Yeah, well, the character Jessica Jones herself was originally created by a man. The comic book that this show is sort of derived from was created by Brian Michael Bendis, but this show was created by a woman named Melissa Rosenberg. And quite a few of the producers and the writers and the directors of these various episodes are women, not exclusively, but I mean, if you look up the credits for the series and you just go down the list of names, lots of women on that list. So it's not just, you know, that a bunch of guys got together and said, let's make a show about Jessica Jones and we'll cast a bunch of women in it, you know, and everybody will love it. It was a story not just about women on screen, but that was largely told by women behind the scenes. And just as we were talking about how, you know, if we want to do something about the sexism and the gender inequality that we see portrayed in our popular media, one way to do it is to simply tell more stories that feature women prominently. Another way is to do what this show also did, and to allow women to tell their stories.
Mm-hmm.
You know.
And isn't that what Shondaland is all about?
Yeah, absolutely. And there are other examples of that too. I mean, that again, that's the way that we correct this disparity. You know, I mean, and with any, and you would look at it that way with any sort of inequality in the way, in art, in media, in popular presentation. I mean, when people point out the fact that there's a lack of representation of non-white people, especially non-white males in the atheist movement, you know, the way you do that is to feature more people of color, to feature more women, to give them, to move aside and give them a more prominent stage. If the problem is there aren't, that you know, like with the controversy that's been raised recently about the lack of people of color who were nominated for Oscars. Mm-hmm. Obviously, I mean, I think that the Academy itself needs to look at the
systemic
things.
You can't fix it in 1 year. It's a systemic problem.
The Academy itself needs to take that into consideration when they make their nominations and when they vote for their, what they think is award worthy. But we also need to focus on providing a greater platform for artists. You know, if we want to see more Black filmmakers, for example, be nominated for major awards, we need to have an opportunity for more Black filmmakers to make more films, and for more women to make more films. It can't just be tokenism. It can't just be, well, we'll put some women in the movie and then that'll make everybody happy. It has to be, like you said, it has to be, the problem is systemic and the solution has to be systemic. The system has to be reformed at all levels. And Jessica Jones is one example of what that would look like, mm-hmm. where the people behind the scenes who are creating the show are not just, you know, 90% men with a few women sprinkled in here and there who hopefully can influence it, but it is much more an equal distribution. Because I mean, again, if you look at those credits, it's not all women. It's not 100% women.
Yeah, it wasn't like they weren't exclusively like shutting men out because we hate you. We're going to drive you from this.
No, of course not. But there are a lot of women in important roles. And again, like we've been saying a couple of times, like that's what we want. That's all the people who advocate for reform or progress or social justice or equity, whatever you want to call it. That's all people are saying should happen, is that there should be more, there should be fairness. It's not that, you know, all us white people have to go away now.
Yeah, exactly.
You know.
Right. It's just about giving more voices. And frankly, you know, okay, maybe I'm just, you know, people only used to live to their 30s in the Middle Ages, so the things maybe didn't seem so repetitive. But growing up, you know, on watching a lot of television and having been exposed to it, you know, I can't do two white guys who are buddies and cops in a show anymore. I can't. I've seen so much of it that when I see all the the archetypes coming into play, you know, the older cop who's gruff and the younger upcomer who's got, you know, fire in his belly. It's like, I'm so tired of it. And that's why I liked the reinvention of Elementary, because by making Watson a woman, you suddenly now have, like, and again, it's sort of like, you know, you get to go back and change all the backstory. You don't know what's going to happen anymore because you've thrown everything out the window, and now you get another character to explore. And when you have women writers writing from their experiences, or not necessarily direct experiences, but drawing on things like this story. I don't want to say anything about the writer, obviously, because I don't know anything, but telling these kinds of stories, at least from a woman's perspective, or bringing in that side, or telling the story from with a character who is in that experience, you get a whole new story. Yeah, you really get new stuff. We're not just doing the same buddy cop dynamic over and over again, because we haven't seen this before. You know why? Because women or people, you know, African Americans, Hispanic Americans, Asian Americans, they haven't had those stories told. I found American Crime the other night. Love it. And I also really liked American Horror Story. But what I really liked about American Crime the first season was you had representation from all communities, and there were sympathetic and kind of, you know, alienating characters from all communities, and seeing that nexus. And of course, in this case, you know, it had to do with crime and racism, so it went in a more negative way, but it had some redemption near the end as well. Just seeing that variety was so refreshing, because I have seen the
Yeah.
stories from a stereotypical point of view, or just with white families before. And
Yeah.
to have major characters who are Muslim, who are going to church, juxtapositions with Christians who are saying the same thing in their churches, it makes you see what the full range of America really could, not really is, because this is fiction, but it gives you an America that is a lot closer to what exists than what you see on TV.
Yeah. And that is a really important point. One of the things I've said a couple times before, in shows like this, or when talking about, films or just popular art in general, is that these are ways in which we tell ourselves who we are. Our movies, our TV shows, our comic books, our art, our literature. This is our culture's way of telling ourselves who we are. And when you, as someone who is not a member of a marginalized community, are able to see people from that community represented on screen, or see stories that are told by people from those communities that are drawing on those experiences, that's the same thing. You're not learning about what they are like. I mean, you are, but the larger picture is you're having it brought home to you that this is a part of who we are. This is yes, this is their story that has been ignored, that has been, not given as much attention in the past, but it is also a part of our story. It's sort of the classic American ideal of the melting pot, which isn't actually an American ideal. It's something that happens all over the world, but it's something that, it doesn't mean we all sort of coalesce and become one, homogenous thing. It means that we live together in our diversity and celebrate each other, and learn about our differences and learn about our similarities. And when you have shows or movies that do that without making a big deal about it, but just saying, look, here is a cast of characters that are from many different backgrounds, that represent many different ways of life. And you can enjoy it and watch it and learn about these different characters. That's a way of telling ourselves who we are. That's a way of saying, this is who we are. And maybe also this is who we might be. If you see this movie, that it consists of many different characters from many different walks of life, and you can see that this works. Well, this can work in real life too. So the variety is very important. The variety is absolutely crucial, because diversity is something that should not be ignored. When people say, oh, I'm colorblind, I don't see color.
Right.
That's not really the point. The diversity is important, but it's important to celebrate it, not to view it as a weakness.
Definitely. You think people are going to be disappointed if we didn't spend all our time bashing white males?
I don't really care. Speaking of, like, when you get to the point with Kilgrave where you're like beyond the point of empathizing, like people who just want to see, like the blood match or whatever, or who want to see you fall into a particular stereotype that they have of you. Oh, I'm going to watch Steve and Kristi. I bet they're just going to take a dump on white people the whole time. If that's what
white men in particular.
Yeah, white men in particular. If that was what they hope to see and they're disappointed, I don't really care.
Yeah, because I don't think, when I wanted to have this conversation, it's really as simple as, when we say that feminism, part of it is about equal, equality. It's equal opportunity, equal chance to tell a story, equal chance to, have the opportunity to get something great out there. And to have people come to this content and really just kind of embrace it without realizing they're embracing a lot of feminist things and themes and ideas, and just the fact that feminism allowed this to be made.
Yeah.
This wouldn't have been made 50 years ago, 150 years ago, just in terms of like where the women are, and and someone taking a risk on it, and then having a society that would embrace this story. All of that is a consequence of the social workings of feminism pushing against traditional gender norms and against these kinds of things, to opening up the opportunities and broadening the diversity, broadening the audience for this kind of content as well. So yeah, I mean, when I kind of was provocative in choosing the title, Feminist Chat about Jessica Jones, but my point in doing it was, the film is feminist inherently, whether or not you want to label it as such, because of all of the things that we've just been talking about.
Yeah, absolutely. And whether someone chooses to label it as feminist or not is really beside the point, as you say. I mean, the point is that these stories and these themes get out there and raise people's consciousness, even if they don't realize it, even if that's not what they're going in there for. And that's really the point. You know, I mean, people have said to me like, well, you know, you call yourself a feminist, but what are you going to call yourself if gender inequality ever goes away? You know, then you couldn't call yourself a feminist anymore if women aren't oppressed. Well, wouldn't
Give
that
me
be a
that
love?
problem.
Yeah, exactly. Won't that be a lovely day? Like that's, to me, that's really the hope of any feminist. You're telling,
Yeah, make yourself
yeah,
redundant.
yeah, exactly. Or not just any civil rights
Yeah.
activist, whatever in whatever inequality you're trying to address. That's the dream of anybody. Like, I'm not going to care what the word is at that point.
Yeah.
You know?
And the benefit of having an approach that allows for a lot of voices, allows for a lot of stories to be told, allows for different people to take up the leading role is, you said, you know, you just get the fuller range of human potential in terms of storytelling, and like you were saying about connecting it, bringing it into your home. Because if, you know, you're a man, you're never going to have the experience a woman would have, but through the character of Jessica, you know, you probably have your own perspective you bring to it as a man, but you're then relating your experience through the character of her, you know, and that makes you kind of, I'm sure, you know, if you want to empathize with a female character, it's, well, at least for me as a woman, it is different than empathizing or taking the side of a male character. Not that it's like a huge difference, but there are just, yeah, different ways that I relate. Like, okay, in a fight scene, I think I might have said this on air before, I get why men are physically bigger, and so that in a storyline, like with Trish and the cop when he came by,
Yeah.
that even though she is fucking hard and
Yeah.
gave him a good fight, he is physically going to, you know, at some point could physically overpower her if she can't fight back. But I want to see him put up a fight. I want to see women who, when like two guys are mixing it up, instead of standing back in the corner or screaming, which is what they've traditionally always made women do. Like, I grew up on a Wonder Woman who ran around in, you know, basically a bathing suit. So just seeing that diversity is so good for, you know, young women to think that, you know, just seeing women as people on the screen. And all of
Yeah.
that comes from making more embracing the idea of feminism, that, you know, raising women's status, and then you can knock onto other areas of inequality like racial inequality and other areas that we also should address, but in this case, you know, women. And then of course, you know, with like issues of Shondaland, race and ethnicity, and that's a whole other area that we haven't, you know, because pretty much except for a few characters, it was a majority white cast.
Yeah.
So that's one thing that we didn't kind of bring up, but I think is worth acknowledging. And obviously,
Definitely.
you know, setting up Luke Cage, and it was great, as you said, he showed up, but he wasn't the star of the show because it wasn't his show. But yeah, I'm kind of babbling at this
Yeah.
point, but it's
Well, no, you do
okay.
bring up a good, you do bring up a good point that I thought about before we went on the air, and then we kind of forgot about it because we were having such a good time talking about it. I mean, if you were going to make a criticism of the show in terms of, you know, representation, it would be that there aren't very many people of color in it, period. And except for Luke Cage's deceased wife, I don't think there are any women of color who are important in the story, and that would be a shortcoming. But you know, that goes back to the importance of having lots more projects like this,
Yes,
you know, so that it doesn't all fall on Jessica Jones
yes, to
to
be
be,
everything for
yeah,
everyone.
to
Yeah,
be the perfect representation. The more projects like this are made and are accepted, the more that representation will exist in our world in general. So that if you watch a movie or a TV show that happens to have a cast of mostly men or mostly white people, it won't be as big of a deal because you will have a much larger context in which people of color, in which women, in which people of different, you know, in what in America might be considered atypical religious backgrounds, whatever, are represented and are able to tell their stories. You know, I remember I read a long time ago, I forget who wrote it, but it was a writer talking about the American Indian experience and how the hope of Native Americans was to one day just be able to be in stories and just be featured as regular people, because up until that point, the primary function of American Indians in fiction was either to be a villain and a savage, or in a modern story to be like an alcoholic or someone who's like living in poverty on a reservation.
or the silent wise man.
Yeah, exactly. Or the silent, either the almost impossibly spiritual wise person. And this writer was saying, you know, why can't we just be normal people? I mean, even when you try to do something positive, you present us as these impossibly, you know, these glowing beings of pure wisdom and knowledge. And that's not true either. Why can't we just be regular people? And I think that's ultimately the point that we want to get to, you know?
Yeah, that's it. And then when you say when that's your goal, that's really depressing. You think
Yeah.
about it as a
Yeah.
as a group that you belong to. Like, can we just be not made to look like freaks? Can we just have a
Yeah.
character whose character and Native American background, that
Yeah.
that's their
Yeah.
who they are? It's not
Well,
much to ask, is it?
no, I mean we haven't gotten to that point yet, obviously, but we're getting closer to that point with the portrayal of LGBT characters. Um,
I just
uh,
watched an episode of Gallivant. I don't know if you're watching that at
I
all.
haven't seen that. No.
I love it. It's kind of a guilty pleasure, but I absolutely love it. And there's a gay
Yeah.
bar scene.
Great. Yeah. I mean, well, because when we mentioned in Jessica Jones, Hogarth and her both her wife and also the woman she's having an affair with that she's going to leave her wife for, like that's a lesbian relationship, and it's not treated as anything outrageous or anything unusual, or it's well she's going through a divorce.
Just like,
And
yeah, every straight couple that would, if it was a man and a woman having a character and Pam was the secretary and Jerry was
yeah,
the guy, it's the exact same storyline. Yeah.
yeah, yeah.
And we're just completely normal. Yeah.
Yeah, nobody. Yeah, no. There's not a single scene that any of those characters are in that are about the fact that they're gay. You know, I have a friend, Jason Brenet, who is a songwriter, and he's hetero, but he wrote a song many years ago from the perspective of a gay man, and like a love song about a gay couple. And someone asked him, like he was on a podcast a little while ago that I listened to, and someone asked him, well, why'd you do that? Like, why'd you write a story from a gay perspective if you're not gay yourself? And he said, I just think there should be more songs about gay people that aren't about the fact that they're gay, and that to me says it all.
Transcending the label, basically,
Yeah.
seeing the person instead of seeing the label.
Yeah.
Well, I think that's a nice way to wrap it up. That's a nice positive note. And oh my gosh, we've
Yeah.
gone an hour and 36 minutes. How did we?
It seems like we just got started.
I know. It's crazy. Unless I can't tell time. It's 6:36 my time. That's crazy. Football's on in like 20 minutes, so we really have to go.
Okay.
But I mean, time always flies with you, Steve. And that's why I keep even when it comes to a natural close, I open the door again because there's always another great conversation just around a pause in our current conversation.
Yeah. I hope people who watch feel the same way.
Yes. Well, I do it more because I like to hang out with you, and then I just take anyone who wants to come along for the ride.
Yeah.
So.
Yeah, that's why. I mean, I feel the same way. Like anytime you want to do something like this and our schedules permit it, like I'm completely up for it because it's always a joy. I mean, I loved our 12 Angry Men conversation. I loved our talk we had about atheism. I love when you drop in on my Patreon hangouts. Like it's just, I love, because I think we always have really fun, awesome conversations. So.
It's one of the things I've become most grateful for. When I started doing videos, you called me, shouted me out, and we were in contact early on, but lately my circle of YouTube friends, I would almost say, has grown a lot. And now I feel kind of weird because I'm watching my friends have hangouts and I'm watching them talk and wishing I could jump in on their conversations. But this is a really phenomenal that, people who are like-minded, who have the similar values and who can have great conversations can meet and interact online. And not only that, but our awesome conversations are recorded for posterity.
Yeah, absolutely.
Like in 20 years, we can come back and watch this conversation and go, gosh, we were so smart.
Yep. It's the best.
It really is. All right. Well, thanks so much for being on. And likewise, if there's ever anything that, you want me to guest host or guest appear on, that if I'm available that date and time, I'll say yes. So
I definitely will keep that in mind because I would love to do this again.
Yeah, we have to find more reasons to do it again. Kevin and I were talking about doing Elementary versus Sherlock. So maybe we could have a group hangout on Elementary and Sherlock. Maybe, I don't think you have a problem with me extending that invitation.
No, that would be awesome. I'd have to catch up on Elementary because I'm not nearly as familiar with it as I am with Sherlock. So.
Okay, well, we could maybe limit it to like the first 2 seasons of Elementary because that's like 24, or that's maybe like 48 episodes or something. That's a lot. And then the Sherlock's longer, but not as many. So that seems fair.
But yeah, I would love to do that because I'm a huge fan of Sherlock. So,
I can't think of another character. Even Robin Hood has not been reinvented as often as Sherlock, I think.
No, Sherlock Holmes is, I think it's between him and Dracula as the most like adapted characters. And I'm pretty sure Sherlock Holmes is in the lead,
Yes, with all the versions of it. But
because there's one Dracula story and there's like 100, original Sherlock Holmes stories. So,
All right, let's see if we can set that up for the spring sometime. So.
Let's do that.
All right. All right. So if you want to hang out just for a little bit while I wrap up with the viewers, hello, all 5 of you. Thanks for watching. And yeah, this is just a bonus video because it was a great topic and a great guest. Thank you guys for watching. You can always put comments and things in the description box below. And until the next time I put up a video, I've been Kristi, and you guys have been awesome. So we'll see you soon. And you can say goodbye, Steve, one last time too.
Bye, everybody. Goodbye.